In 1520, a man ascended the Ottoman throne who was destined to become a legend. Suleiman I, the very magnificent, or Kanuni, the Lawgiver, whose name is synonymous with the zenith of the empire's power. We know everything about him: his military campaigns, his love for Hurrem, his architectural masterpieces, and his tragic end in the struggle between his sons. But the story began long before that. It began with a quiet, almost forgotten drama that played out in the shadow of his rise. A drama in which the primary victims were those closest to him by blood. To understand the scale of this family tragedy, we must look to the past. Suleiman was not the first, nor was he alone. He was the son of the grim and resolute Selim I, nicknamed Yavuz, the Grim or the Stern, the very man who in less than a decade of rule doubled the empire's territory, crushed the Mamluks, and assumed the title of Custodian of the Two Holy Mosques. His consort, the mother of his children, was the influential Ayşe Hafsa Sultan. This powerful couple had at least 4 children, and besides them, Selim had children from other women as well. Here lies the key question that is often overlooked when gazing upon Suleiman's golden age. What happened to all the others? What became of his brothers and sisters at the moment he gained power over the world? The fate of each of these individuals is a separate detective story of political intrigue, sudden twists, and, as a rule, a tragic ending. These are stories not from textbooks, but from the records of palace chroniclers, where cold formulations conceal real human dramas. And to understand who he became, one must first learn whom he had to lose on that path. History is not just the formal portraits of sultans, it is also the silent shadows behind them. To not miss new stories, please like and subscribe to the channel. For us, this is very important and always motivates us to make our videos more quality and interesting.
Abdullah, Mahid, and Murad, the brothers of Suleiman, executed by their father. The Topkapi harem in the first decades of the 16th century is not just about silk, whispers, and hookah smoke. It is, first and foremost, the epicenter of the world's most dangerous game, where the stake is the greatest throne on earth, and losing means not a loss of money, but the silent snap of a silk cord around the neck. Suleiman the Magnificent ascended this throne in 1520, seemingly by all the rules. He was the eldest surviving son. But surviving is the key word here. His path to power was cleared with chilling efficiency. His 3 brothers, Abdullah, Mahid, and Murad, did not live to see that day. They became victims not of some abstract sultanic cruelty, but of the specific, razor-sharp logic of their father, Selim I, nicknamed the Grim or the Stern, not merely for his fierce temper, but for his systematic approach to the problem of succession. Selim ruled briefly, only 8 years, but managed to turn the empire into a giant military camp and conquer Egypt. He came to power himself, literally carving his path through the corpses of his brothers and his father, Sultan Bayezid II. The paranoia born in such conditions is not a diagnosis, but an occupational hazard. His eldest sons had died natural deaths, but the 3 younger ones fell victim to the millstones of his pragmatic calculus. The eldest of this doomed trio was Shehzadeh Abdullah. He had already left childhood behind, was educated in the palace school of Enderun, and even tasted power. He was sent as governor to one of the Anatolian provinces, likely Konya. This was the standard springboard for a prince: govern, learn, build your network. But in the Ottoman Empire, having your own network was the first step toward being considered dangerous, especially when your father was waging a total war in the east against Shiite Persia.
rumors began to swirl around Abdullah, the son of a concubine possibly of Persian or Caucasian origin. Whispers suggested he sympathized with the Shiite rebels whom Selim was fighting to the death. Eunuchs reported. Viziers seeking to back another contender whispered. In 1514, the order caught up with Abdullah. He was executed, not with a sword in the square, but quietly, in the royal manner, by strangulation with a silk cord.
Next came Mahid, sometimes called Mahmud. His story is the perfect plot for a political thriller with elements of family drama. It is said that he was loved by Valid Sultan herself, Ayşe Hafsa, mother of Selim and grandmother to all the princes. There were whispers that she saw in him an alternative to Suleiman. Mahid, no longer a boy, might have begun building connections among Janissary officers dissatisfied with the endless campaigns of the cruel sultan. For Selim, this was a red flag. A rebellion inspired by his own son and possibly supported by his mother? Most chronicles speak of an execution in 1518, but here history develops a crack. Some modern researchers, digging through records, find strange inconsistencies. An epidemic of plague was decimating the army and the capital at the time. Perhaps Mahid simply fell victim to it, and the myth of the execution arose later to justify Selim's cruelty, or, conversely, to attribute a natural death to it. This uncertainty is part of the rules of the game. In a world where any prince's death is political, even illness becomes a tool of propaganda. The youngest, Murad, was almost a child when the wheel of history ran over him too. He was about 11. He had not yet become a governor, had not woven intrigues with the Janissaries. He simply lived in the harem, a pupil of his teachers and a plaything in the hands of the eunuchs. But Selim was settling accounts. His heir, Suleiman, was already appointed and waiting his turn in Manisa. But what to do with the spare players? Even an 11-year-old boy could, in a few years, become a banner for rebels discontented with the rule of the new sultan. The law allowing for the elimination of potential rivals for the stability of the state knew no age restrictions. The sultan orders Murad to be strangled to secure the dynasty. This was not an outburst of anger, but a cold administrative act, the final purge of the dynastic ranks. The fates of these three are like three different scripts of the same tragedy. Abdullah, a prince suspected of political unreliability. Mahid, a favorite who became a victim of palace intrigues. Murad, an innocent child, eliminated as a potential risk. Their stories are the bloody foundation upon which Suleiman's golden age was erected. Suleiman himself, upon ascending the throne, learned this lesson all too well. His own sons, Mustafa, Mehmed, and Bayezid, would later repeat the fate of the Sultan's brothers, falling in the struggle for power, this time instigated by their father and the powerful Hurrem Sultan. Modern historiography provides an interesting twist. More and more scholars cautiously remind us we cannot be absolutely certain of the execution of each of them. Ottoman chronicles were written with a specific purpose, to show the Sultan's resolve and control. Death from plague or smallpox in that era was commonplace, but to admit that a prince died of illness meant to show the dynasty's vulnerability. To announce an execution, however, was to demonstrate the ruler's strength and ruthless control. Thus, myth was born, mingling with reality. Whether they were executed or died of natural deaths doesn't change the main point. In the political field of the Ottoman dynasty, they were doomed to disappear. Their quiet, half-forgotten graves are not just a memory of three boys. They are silent monuments to the very system where the price for the greatness of one was paid with the lives of many.
Yavuz, the unacknowledged son of Selim from an unknown concubine. Let me tell you the story of a man who did not exist. Or rather, he did, flesh, blood, breath. But in the eyes of the state, in the chronicles, in the memory of the dynasty, he dissolved like smoke over the Bosphorus at dawn. His name was Yavuz, and his greatest salvation was that he was officially not recognized as the son of the Sultan. While his older half-brother Suleiman was preparing to become the Magnificent, and other brothers, Abdullah, Mahid, Murad, already saw the reflection of future sultans in their mirrors. Uwais existed in a strange gray zone. He was a ghost at court, the son of Selim the Grim from a concubine of such low status that her name was not merely forgotten, it seems it was never even recorded. She was a haji, a servant, one of hundreds of shadows gliding through the corridors of the harem. After giving birth, she was, according to rumors, simply exiled, and Uwais remained, a child without a mother, a prince without a title, a shehzadeh without a sanjak. In 1518, a Venetian ambassador reports on a boy of about 7, kept in isolation. He describes a child with an unusual mind and a strong build. But Selim acts unconventionally. He does not send the executioner. Instead, he applies a cunning, almost bureaucratic execution. He erases Uwais from the dynastic list. The boy is declared the son of another man, perhaps some official or even a freedman. It was a move brilliant in its cruelty. Uwais is physically alive, but legally he is no longer a shehzadeh. He has no rights to the throne. He is nobody, zero, and empty space. Imagine this absurd drama. In the old palace, that shed for discarded wives and unwanted princes, lives a boy. He hears the guards bow respectfully to his half-brother Suleiman. He perhaps even understands that he shares his father's blood with him. But while Suleiman is educated by the empire's finest minds and governs a province, Uwais learns to be invisible. His main skill is not attracting attention. What became of him later? The Ottoman chronicles are silent. Reality, as is often the case, is more prosaic and tragic. Modern historians, painstakingly assembling the puzzle from disparate records, suggest that Uwais was still alive during the reign of his half-brother Suleiman, not as a prince, but as a minor official in some distant province. He watched the great drama of his family unfold, the rise of Hurrem, the execution of Mustafa, the endless intrigues, and he understood that his greatest blessing was absence, the absence of recognition, ambition, chance. His lack of acknowledgement became his armor.
Fatma Sultan was the first sister. Among the daughters of Selim the Grim, there was one who played by all the rules from the very beginning, Fatma Sultan. Her biography is a textbook on survival and influence in the 16th century. If her brother Suleiman was the magnificent sultan, then she was a brilliant diplomatic asset, costly, reusable, and extremely effective. When her father Selim ascended the throne, the customary Ottoman game began. Fatma's brothers, her uncles and nephews, all were expendable in the struggle for the throne. For her, as a woman, the path was different. Her name became a top-tier pawn, moved across the chessboard of the empire, and which, in the end, began to move the pieces herself. Fatma's first marriage was not the beginning of a beautiful fairy tale, but a cruel prologue to a life full of disappointment. She was given in marriage to Mustafa Pasha, the Sanjak Bey of Antalya. The wedding date fluctuates between 1524 and 1530, historians argue, but for Fatma the essence was the same. She was sent into exile under the sun of Antalya to a man who did not want her. Sakaoglu reveals shocking details. The marriage was a disaster from the first night. Mustafa Pasha did not hide his preferences. He was interested in young boys, not the Sultan's daughter. Fatma found herself not a wife, but a living shield, covering for a high-ranking Pasha. The neglect was so egregious that she wrote a desperate letter. Here the story takes a pirouette. Sakaoglu claims she wrote to her father, but her father, Sultan Selim I, had been dead for 10 years by then. It is likely she was appealing to her brother, Suleiman. The fact remains, her cry for help was so loud that it was recorded in the chronicles. In the end, divorce. The first experience ended in public humiliation.
She was returned to Topkapi, but now she was a divorced sultana with a tarnished reputation. The second act of her personal drama began in 1552. After many years in the shadows, she was thrust back onto the political stage, married off to Kara Ahmed Pasha, a powerful vizier, and soon the Grand Vizier. This was not a love match, but a transaction. Fatma, a woman no longer young, became a bargaining chip in the game of clans.
But her new status as the empire's first lady was short-lived, just 3 years. In 1555, Kara Ahmed Pasha was executed on the orders of her own brother, Suleiman. The official reason was bribery. The real reason was a palace coup. Rustem Pasha, his ambitious wife Mihrima Sultan, and the all-powerful Hurrem Sultan had woven a conspiracy. They needed the Grand Vizierate for Rustem, and Fatma and her husband were the obstacle that had to be removed. Her second husband ascended the scaffold, and she became a widow once more, this time the widow of a disgraced traitor. And here, Fatma's story takes a surreal turn. Evidence emerges of a possible third marriage, and this was not a marriage to a powerful pasha. Her alleged new chosen one was Hadim Ibrahim Pasha. The key word, Hadim. It is not a name, but a title. A eunuch. Imagine the scandal. The daughter of a sultan, the sister of the padishah, marrying a castrated servant. But what if this was not a marriage, but a brilliant, desperate intrigue? Historian Necdet Sakaoğlu suggests it could have been a union of convenience. Perhaps marriage to a eunuch, a friend for the hereafter, was the only way for Fatma to gain freedom of movement, for instance to go on a pilgrimage, to leave the stifling harem. Or it was an attempt to secure herself by becoming utterly useless from a political standpoint, and thus uninteresting to conspirators. In any case, it was a gesture of absolute desperation or incredible calculation. Even her death is shrouded in contradictions. Did she die in 1553 before her second husband's execution, consumed by shame? Or did she outlive him by 15 years, dragging out a pitiful existence? Historians cannot agree. The location of her burial is also disputed. Her body became a symbol of her life, lost between worlds, belonging to no one. She left no children. Her only material legacy is the mosque bearing her name near Topkapi, which, according to some sources, she herself commissioned. The stones outlived her. Her story is not one of a powerful sultana. It is the story of a woman used 3 times as a tool, first to cover up a disgrace, then as a pawn in a conspiracy, and finally, perhaps, as the object of a scandalous fiction.
Hatice Sultan, the philanthropist's sister. In Suleiman's family, there was a sister whose name became synonymous with the greatest historical what-if, Hatice Sultan. If her sister Fatma is a story of cold calculation, then Hatice's life is a classic tragedy. Romance, power, a feast atop the ruins, and an ominous silence in the finale. Her first marriage to Iskender Pasha flashed by like a failed film frame. The Pasha quickly faded into oblivion, leaving the young widow in her mother's chambers. And here, entering the stage, came her brother, Sultan Suleiman, and his closest companion, a man named Pargali Ibrahim, a Bosnian slave who became the Padishah's best friend, his right hand, his Grand Vizier. And so, the legend begins. According to the canonical version, popularized by television series, the wedding of the century took place in 1524. The Sultan gave his beloved sister in marriage to his best friend. This was not a marriage, it was a hymn to human feelings over convention. Ibrahim, not of royal blood, was wedding a princess herself. The ceremony lasted 15 days. Imagine the scale. The empire halted for a week to feast. Money flowed like a river.
Thousands of oxen were slaughtered in the squares, tons of wheat and honey were distributed. This was not a wedding, it was a demonstration of power and favor. But every such demonstration has a flip side. The Janissaries watching this spectacle grimly noted every coin spent. Ibrahim's luxury began to accumulate in their memory like a promissory note. The newlyweds were gifted not a house but an entire palace in the very heart of power opposite the walls of Topkapi. It seemed like the peak, an absolute idol, a brother sultan, a husband vizier, love and influence. But in the Ottoman Empire, the peak is the most dangerous point on the map. From there is only one way down. Ibrahim Pasha grew in power, his titles multiplied, and his arrogance, or confidence depending on one's point of view, became proverbial. And then came the year 1536, one of the coldest nights in Ottoman history. Ibrahim Pasha, the loyal friend and formidable Grand Vizier, was invited to dinner at the palace, according to one version for the traditional conversation on the eve of Ramadan. After the meal, he was taken to a resting chamber. There, the mute guards with a silk cord awaited him. The order was precise and merciless: execute him before morning. Thus ended the career of the most powerful vizier. And what of Hatice?
And here the story cracks, because this beautiful, dramatic plot, the marriage of the sister and the favorite, is now being dissected by historians like investigators at a crime scene. There is no direct evidence. The Ottoman chroniclers of that time describe in detail Ibrahim's magnificent wedding in 1524, but do not name the bride. Venetian diplomats, usually informed of every whisper in the harem, remain silent. Hatice's name firmly emerges only centuries later, like someone's brilliant literary insertion into the historical text. What do we know for certain? Hatice had 2 daughters. She survived Ibrahim and died in obscurity after 1536, finding her final resting place next to her mother, not her husband. Her life is like a scroll where the top colorful layer has gradually crumbled away, revealing a duller but more durable canvas of reality. So was she that woman whose marriage became the symbol of Ibrahim's rise and fall? Or was her story different, and did the legend simply find the most suitable, the most tragic image? This is no longer a question of archives, it is a question of our choice. It is a plot where a brother's love for his sister and friend collides with the cold calculation of an autocrat for whom the state, in the end, is always more important than personal bonds. Hatice Sultan, willingly or not, remains forever in this drama, like a ghost in the luxurious chambers of the palace at the Hippodrome, which may not have been her home, but has certainly become a monument to her myth.
Beyhan Sultan, a sister in the shadow of intrigue. If Fatma was the diplomatic genius of the system, her younger sister, Beyhan Sultan, became its rebellious antithesis. Her story is not one of subtle alliances and charitable foundations. It is one of rage, public scandal, and cold vengeance, stretched over decades. She was married off to Ferhat Pasha, a man whose reputation preceded him. Historians like Harold Lamb would later describe him succinctly and pointedly. Savagery was part of his nature. This was not about domestic cruelty. It was about the ferocity of a warrior, about ambitions that knew no bounds. He rose to the post of third vizier, becoming part of the empire's brain. And, it seems, Beyhan saw in this very savagery not a vice, but an essence. She did not merely accept this man, she identified with him. He became her weapon, her stake in the great game. And this stake lost. Ferhat Pasha somehow angered her brother, Suleiman. Not just somehow, sufficiently for the shadow of disfavor to loom. At this moment, Beyhan does what all sultanas did. She rushes to her mother, Valide Ayşe Hafsa, using her as the primary lobbying channel to the sultan's heart. The system worked the first time. Suleiman, respecting his mother, pardoned his brother-in-law. But Ferhat Pasha's savagery proved stronger than his instinct for self-preservation. In the autumn of 1525, he again provoked the Padishah's wrath, this time fatally. The verdict was brief and not subject to appeal: execution. For Suleiman, it was a routine purge, the removal of an unpredictable element. For Beyhan, it was a personal apocalypse. The one she had protected, the one she was proud of, the one she may have loved, was destroyed by the order of her own flesh and blood.
And here occurred a breach of protocol that stunned contemporaries. The Ottoman princess did not bow her head. She did not accept a consolatory new marriage as a sign of reconciliation. She declared a cold war. First, a firm, demonstrative refusal, no negotiations for a new husband, no participation in court life. She rolled out of Istanbul into voluntary exile. This was not just a departure, it was a loud, deafening slam of the door, heard in every corridor of Topkapi. But the climax came later, during a chance encounter. Picture the scene: the Valide Sultan's chambers, a mother attempting to be a bridge between her children, and Beyhan looking into the eyes of Suleiman the Magnificent himself, the sovereign of 2 continents, says what was tantamount to treason. The phrase carves itself into history with its icy, razor-sharp cruelty. "I hope I will soon wear mourning again, this time for my brother." This was not merely an insult, it was a ritual curse. She, a sister, publicly wished death upon the Sultan. In a society where a wrong glance could send one to their death, she was not executed, she was not imprisoned. Why? Perhaps the shield of her mother Ayşe Hafsa's love held strong? Perhaps Suleiman, deep down, understood he had crossed a line by executing her husband, and this explosion of rage was the price. Or perhaps to kill her would have been to acknowledge the power of her blow. It was easier to pretend she no longer existed. Paradoxically, this woman who vowed eternal mourning later did marry a second time, to Mehmed Pasha. She bore a daughter, Ismihan. But this was no longer a story of power or passion. It was the private life of a woman who had played her main, public part to its end. She died in her own palace, never returning to her brother's court, long before 1559. It is unknown if they ever reconciled. Her rebellion did not break the system, it simply proved that even within the gilded cage of a dynasty, a spirit could be born that would choose to burn in the flame of its own truth, rather than smolder quietly in a corner on velvet cushions. Her silence after the scandal was louder than any intrigue. It was the quiet of an implacable front.
Shah Sultan. The story of Shah Sultan is not about impeccable adherence to protocol. It is about scandal, principles, and a spiritual quest that led her far beyond the palace carpets. Her biography resembles not an official chronicle, but a twisted plot with an unexpected third act, where instead of a new husband, a Sufi sheikh appears. Imagine the standard scenario for an Ottoman princess, a marriage of convenience to a man in power. For Shah, this scenario was written twice. First, she was given, or only planned to be given, in marriage to Lutfi Pasha, when he was merely a Sanjak Bey, a promising administrator in the provinces. It was a modest but reliable option. However, fate, or rather her brother Suleiman, rewrote the draft. In 1539, Lutfi became the Grand Vizier, the second most powerful man in the empire.
And suddenly, the marriage to the Sultan's sister transformed from a reward for a regional official into the centerpiece of a program to consolidate loyalty at the very top. Shah Sultan became the wife of a man who held executive power over millions. It seemed to be the peak of a career, both for her and for him. But Lutfi Pasha possessed not only administrative genius, but also a terrifying cruelty. The incident that shattered this marriage is so vivid that even restrained chroniclers reported it to us. In 1541, a sex worker was caught in Istanbul. The vizier, true to the letter of the law, or his monstrous interpretation of Sharia, pronounced the verdict, death in the most brutal form. It was not just an execution, it was a theater of horror and humiliation, violating all unwritten rules of decency, even for the harsh 16th century. The news, like a virus, instantly penetrated the walls of the harem. The eunuchs, those chief couriers of palace gossip and truth, reported it to Shah Sultan. And here the incredible happened. The princess did not nod, saying, "The vizier is right, they deserve it." She summoned her husband for a talk. She did not ask, she demanded an explanation. And when Lutfi Pasha, stubbornly digging in his heels, declared he would continue to punish in this manner, Shah could not contain herself. Historians have conveyed her words verbatim. "You are stubborn, cruel, and rude."
In that moment, Lutfi Pasha's world collapsed. He was the Grand Vizier, the Sultan's deputy on earth, and his wife, a woman, dared to call him rude? According to one version, rage blinded him so completely that he seized an iron mace and moved against his spouse. That was the end. The eunuchs and maidservants guarding the sacred space of the Sultan's sister did not hesitate to evict the empire's first minister. They physically threw him out. When this was reported to Suleiman, his reaction was swift and unambiguous. Not because he was a great humanitarian, but because the insult inflicted upon his sister was an insult to the dynasty itself. Lutfi Pasha was instantly dismissed, the marriage annulled. Thus, Shah Sultan, risking her life with a single conversation, sent the second most powerful man in the state into retirement. And what next? Another in her place would have waited for a new, advantageous husband, the next Pasha, but Shah chose a different path. The world of politics and marriages of convenience ended for her at the doors of her chambers, from which the unruly vizier had been thrown out. Her life took a sharp turn, from politics to mysticism. She grew close to the sheikh of a Sufi order, Merkez Effendi. Historians still argue to this day, was he her spiritual mentor, or, as rumors go, her secret or even open husband? The age difference was colossal, making this story even more enigmatic. Perhaps she was drawn not by carnal passion, but by spiritual passion. She built a small house by the gates of the dervish lodge, immersing herself in practices and contemplations so far removed from the noise of the divan and the intrigues of the harem. Her legacy is not in children, though her daughter Esmehan lived her own life, or in political alliances. It is in stone and in waqfs, pious endowments. The mosque in Ayub, built by Sinan himself in 1556, a madrasa, a school. This was no longer charity to consolidate power, but sincere piety. She died in 1572, having outlived both her sultan brother and her turbulent youth. She was buried not next to her husband or the sheikh, but in the most prestigious dynastic spot, next to the tomb of her father, Selim the Grim. Shah Sultan journeyed from an instrument of high politics to a person who publicly condemned that politics, from the wife of a grand vizier to a disciple of a Sufi sheikh. Her story is a rare example for that era of how principles and a spiritual quest proved stronger than career elevators at reasons of state. She did not simply marry and bear children, she left the system when it ceased to correspond to her inner code.